Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Christ the royal master leads against the foe, forward into battle, see his banners go. Onward, Christian soldiers, marching as to war, with the cross of Jesus going on before. Oh, for a faith that will not shrink, though pressed by every foe, that will not tremble on the brink of any earthly woe, that will not murmur or complain beneath a chastening rod, but in the hour of grief or pain will lean upon its God. A faith that shines more bright and clear when tempests rage without, that when in danger knows no fear, in darkness feels no doubt. Lord, give us such a faith as this, and then whatever may come, we'll taste and hear the hallowed bliss of an eternal home. A charge to keep I have, a God to glorify, a never-dying soul to save, and fitted for the sky, to serve the present age, my calling to fulfill. Oh, may it all my powers engage to do my Master's will. Arm me with jealous care, as in thy sight to live, and O thy servant, Lord, prepare a strict account to give. Help me to watch and pray, and on thyself rely. Assured if I my trust betray, I shall forever die. Rise. Good afternoon. You're like waiting for the end of that video, aren't you, CJ? Shocker! Hey, he ended the video too soon. Yes, that's because it is 5:31. Let's edify one another, shall we? Today we are in the study to show ourselves approved, beginning at the beginning class, lessons in Genesis. And as we covered last week, you may remember, well, first off, I want to say hello, welcome. Glad to have you here. Whoop, whoop. Hello, Reba. How you doing? CJ, how are you? He's slapping at himself because he just read the private message wherein I told him that Alicia was tagging. And he's like, you just blabbed that out for everybody. Well, that's part of edifying the saints with professionalism and shenanigans. Is it not? Our motto here. So, just to bring us up on the speed, we began at the beginning. What a wonderful place to begin. We were introduced to the fact that before the earth and the heavens, before even time was created, God was. For in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Good afternoon, Maureen. Good to see you. And we went through a chronological step-by-step. Good afternoon, Kat. Creation as it covered in Genesis chapter 1, day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way through day 6. And we saw actually the building blocks, how each day built upon the other. For example, day 1. Well, in day 1, we have time beginning, we have the heavens and the earth being created, and we have day and night. And hello, Debbie. And Alicia says, hi, Dina. So, Dina, you've been shown to be here. Hello, Dina. Well, and then day 2, what do we have? Anybody remember what was created on day 2? CJ's heading back to look in the Bible just to refresh his memory. Day 2, God made clouds and sky so blue. Day 2. Debbie says, thank you so much for taking me away from a movie. This is so much better. You're welcome, Debbie. And as we proceed through these days, through these days, we see that each day built upon the next. So we have skies, then we have seas and dry land, then we have vegetation, and we have the stars, the sun, moon, and stars. I'm sure I'm getting those two mixed up. Well, there's the seas and dry land. Yep, day 4 was the stars in the sky and the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5 was the vegetation, the animals in the sea. I'm still doing it wrong. I'm trying to sing that song in my head, and it's like, no, there's something. Okay, day 3. What I was right. Day 3 was the grasses, in addition to the dry land. Well. We'll get it all right. But each day was a building block upon the next. And as God created a habitation for his crowning creation, if you will, and that being, of course, man, the one being who was created in his own image. You see, everything was created for a habitation for man. In chapter 2, last week, we saw how that after examining how God created man in his image, how man was created in the image of God, we looked at how God ceased from his weekly creation, from his creation of the week, resting on the 7th day. And then what happens is Genesis turns from that chronological relation of the creation to a history of, or a fleshing out, if you will, of that one day wherein God created man. As Genesis chapter 2 tells us, this is the history of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens, before any plant of the field was in the earth, and before any herb of the field had grown, for the Lord God had not caused it to rain on the earth, and there was no man to till the ground. But the mist went up from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. So this is the history. And it changes focus to God creating man and a place more specific. So a specific location for him upon the earth. Hello, Rob. Good to see you. And we looked at each of those, or not each of those, we looked at the actual act of creation of man in Genesis chapter 2, and how God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. Man became a living being, a living will. One thing we probably didn't cover much of is the purpose of man. We mentioned it briefly. Let's see here. Here's where in 2 verse 8, this is where he puts a man in the garden that was eastward in Eden. And he describes the garden right here. Hello, Sam. Good to see you. And in 2 verse 15, when we join 2 verse 15 with Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28, we see a purpose to man. Here in 2:15, his purpose was to take care or tend to keep the Garden of Eden. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 28, God says, specifically in 27, oh, it is in 26 too, that man was created to have dominion over the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. Man was created as a steward of what God had created. Inclusive within this phrase, or this this task, let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. Specifically over all the earth, inclusive in that is over man themselves. We are to have dominion over ourselves. Man is created to be a steward. Now, as we come down in Genesis chapter 2, and this is again is just a review of what we've covered to this point, we find that God says this. Now, oftentimes we find people, and perhaps you have occasionally felt this need, this desire as well, to, go away and get away from everything, to get away from everybody. But God says this: it's not good that man should be alone. There was a popular song back in the 80s. I believe it was, I don't remember if it was composed in the 80s or 70s. Maybe one of y'all might remember this one. But it was written and composed by Paul Simon of the band Simon and Garfunkel. And I believe it was called The Boxer. Anyhow, there's a phrase in there, I am a rock, I am an island. No man is an island unto himself. God says that it is not good that man should be alone. And so he makes a helper that was suitable or comparable to him. And we discussed what that means last week as well. One who was not someone that was beneath them. So not one that was over him, but rather one that was capable of walking beside them, fulfilling the needs and fulfilling the shortcomings of man. And this, of course, man in the male gender. And he begins by forming every beast of the field and bird of the air, and brings them to Adam to see what he would call them. The purpose. Debbie says, I don't like to be alone, but sometimes I want to be left alone, if that makes sense. I think we all have that desire to be left alone, as in so that people don't mess with us. But there are times when even I would just simply rather go off into the trees, off into the forest, and be alone. Sometimes it seems to me as if it would be a lot better for me just to be a hermit. But that's not what God called me for. That's not what he created me for. And there was actually an entire movement out of the church that arose that was called monasticism, that gave in to that desire. And there was even an extreme cases within that movement that well, it was so extreme. One man went and erected a pillar, and on top of that pillar, he had a platform that was large enough basically for him to sit. And I believe he spent several decades on that pillar by himself. That was how severe that the extreme length that he went to get away from everybody, and thinking that he was closer to God because he was higher up off the earth. But anyhow, I digress. So the purpose of God bringing these animals to Adam was not because God didn't know which would be a suitable helper for Adam, but rather to show to Adam that these were not going to be suitable helpers for him. And yes, hello, Shad. So Adam gave names to all the cattle, birds of the air, every beast of the field, etc. But he didn't find a suitable companion for him. So God caused the deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he, of course, then took a rib and fashioned a woman. And man said, ho, ho, this is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. CJ just sat up in his chair a little bit straighter there. Oh. Someone likes to mess around with my e-sword. There we go. That's better. Now, and then God installs, and again, it's been medically proven that man is not short of a rib anymore. Never, other than Adam, no other man was born short of a rib. But woman is still man's suitable companion, otherwise known as a helpmeet, otherwise known as a comparable helper. Sam says, I thought the way before, but because none who are walking toward God but only a short time. But I thought for a time to be a hermit. Hello, Sean. So in Genesis 2:24, God establishes what I term and many term is a creation principle. And no, we wouldn't look at the Greek word for the word used for rib, because this is Hebrew, not Greek. And rib means rib. Some things are just plain absolutely apparent. I suppose I could if you wish me to, but I mean, some things, like I said, are just plain flat out. Tsela, it means a rib, as curved, literally, of the body, or figuratively of a door, that is a leaf, hence side. There you go. Ta-da! Oh, yeah. So no, nobody can go along with that commercial and go, "I want my baby back, ribs." I mean, Pat, Debbie, you don't have to worry. Pat's not going to be going around going, "I want my baby back, ribs." So, but it literally means ribs. CJ's giving me the finger, naughty finger like this. Half of a what? I can't read the rest of that. No, it's literally ribs. It's curved from the side. There's only one, I mean, it's not going to be a thigh bone. Let me tell you that. Debbie says because CJ's hungry. So, the creation principle. No, Adam was not half gone. Let's. He took one bone. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Man and woman need to leave their parentage. So, and they need to cleave to one another, as some people have called that the leaving and cleaving. Sam, we're here for the Bible, not for the reason why it's called baby back ribs. If you want to figure that out, you're going to have to go to the South to figure that one out. I don't know. That's above my pay grade, and I'm going to focus on the Bible. And they were both naked, man and wife, and they were not ashamed, which means they were naive. They were innocent. Now let's turn our attention to Genesis chapter 3. We have location. We have the principal, I guess you might say, characters. Adam and Eve were definitely characters, but not necessarily in the way that we would think of characters. Not funny, haha characters. And this was not a play. This was real life. So what we have here is the fall, as it's typically called, the first sin. And let's clear the stage. Here we have we're in Eden. That's where man is at. And they have had In this garden, they have every food that they need. They have every tree to grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. They also have the tree of life, which they can partake of and continue to have life. And they have the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Now, God gives instruction to man, saying, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. He has a purpose for man, and he has one command. Just one. He says, everything in here you can eat. Whatever you desire to eat, you can eat. But one tree. Don't eat this tree. It's not good for you. So, now comes on the scene a serpent. Cunning more cunning than any beast of the field, with which the Lord God had made. And he says to the woman, has God indeed said, you shall not eat of every tree of the garden? Questions arise. Why is the woman listening to an animal? Why is an animal speaking? Yes, I know it's a reptile, not an animal. And why is she just standing there listening to this? Well, let's face it. If they're naked and not ashamed, they're pretty naive, wouldn't you say? How would they know that it's not common for animals to talk? Riddle me that one, CJ. He's like, that thought never occurred to me. These are people who are 1 day old or less. How would they know? Now, notice the woman's reply. She gets it right, doesn't she? She says, we may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, you shall not eat it. You shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die. Now, God told Adam, you shall not eat of it, lest you die. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall die. Was Eve there? So where's her instruction coming from? Adam. And y'all don't hesitate. Don't make CJ the only one piping up here. And thank you, O'Shea, for filling in here. CJ's dictating. He's like, what's with the play-by-play, Levi? Adam does what he's supposed to and informs Eve of God's command. In fact, he goes so far as to say, don't even touch it, Eve. And so she gets it right. Yeah, we're not supposed to eat of this, and we're not even supposed to touch it. Then the serpent says, you're not going to surely die. Well, and we don't need to, I mean, for us, do we really need to worry about whether or not it's the God said, do not even touch it? He said, don't eat of it. That for you and I is enough. Perhaps she might have questioned him. There's so many speculations that we could enter into when we deal with this, but we're not told, are we? And it could also have been the way that any of you ever played Whisper Down the Lane? You ever played that? Pretty fun, right? The teacher gives you one word or one phrase, and by the time you get 10 students down the line, it's something totally different. Well, this can be very similar. Regardless, we know that God said, do not eat of it. And the serpent says, you're not going to surely die. God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. All right. So what's the temptation here? First, he calls God a liar. Not just that, he calls Adam a liar, he calls God a liar. He calls whoever has told her this a liar. You will not surely die. Secondly, what we see here in verse 5 is that your eyes are going to be opened. He says that God's afraid. And this, of course, is looking at the emotion behind the words. What he's implying behind the words here. For God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened. And then what we have is that you will be like God. He appeals to her desire to be like her dad. How many of you remember the period of your life when you wanted to be like your dad? When I grow up, I'm going to be like my dad. I never wanted to be a bus driver like my dad. He was a substitute bus driver when I was growing up. I wanted to be a preacher like my dad, and I wanted to be a law enforcement officer, which my dad was not. But I wanted to be a preacher. That's another good one as well, CJ. That's another good implication behind there. Anything else anybody can think about? But he, as I continue through here, if you think of other ways that this applies, or this would be a temptation, or what he's implying through these words, throw it out there. But he's throwing these bones at her, trying to see which one's going to stick. You're going to be like God. You're going to be like your Father, knowing good and evil, just like he does. Now, are all these true? The one, look at this. Did they die? Not physically. Hello, Teresa. They didn't physically die that moment, did they? And of course, if they had eaten of the tree of the life, they wouldn't have died. But that's for another point. Were their eyes opened? Yeah, that was going to be opened, wasn't it? Were they going to become like God, knowing good and evil? Oh, yeah. Every single one of these was true in a sense, was true in a half sense. He puts just enough truth in it that it sounds plausible, that it sounds pleasant and good. Can you think of other temptations in your life where Satan has done the same thing? Or have you thought, like CJ points out, God's holding something back from you? Look at what effect it had on the woman. She saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise. In other words, it was food. It looked good. And it had the intended purpose of making one wise, like God. Yes. Well, we know, by the way, we'll get down to that. We know, by the way, that they did die that day spiritually. Their eyes were opened, but they were also shut. You see, in the day that they partook of that fruit, that of whatever tree it was, it could have been a pear for all we know, or care. CJ, apple. Well, it's still whatever fruit it was, Sam. We don't know. It could have been an apple. It could have been something totally different. But we know that they died spiritually. We know that their eyes were darkened with sin. And we do know that they were given knowledge of good and evil. For in the day that they partook of it, they recognized evil. They recognized their sin and that they had a choice and they had chosen wrong. Let's continue. She saw it was pleasant. It was good for the food. It was good for food. It was pleasant to the eyes. And it was a tree to make one wise. So she took of it and ate. Could be. I don't remember who it was that made the apple idea famous. That's a good question, Sam. The point of it is, it doesn't matter what tree, what kind of fruit it was. It could have been an apple. The fact is, God says, don't eat of it. Even if it was an apple, God says, don't eat of it. Because you see, what was the knowledge of good and evil? That they had chose wrong. They had disobeyed God. And in the moment that they disobeyed God, whether it was a pear, an apple, a nectarine, or a crab apple, that was some crabby food. They disobeyed God. And that was when their eyes opened. It may have been a special tree. Regardless, even if it was a special tree, it was destroyed in the flood. Along with the tree of life, by the way. That's a totally different that's a different branch. Anyway, the story, Debbie says, yes, the story is about obedience, I think. It is. regardless of what tree or fruit it was. The whole account is about obedience and their disobedience. Now, she compounds her sin by this. You know, she could have just simply suffered the fate by herself. But what does she do? She gave it to her husband. Now, he had a choice. You and I both know that whatever the wife sets in front of us, we tend to eat. Most of us say, hey, that was a good thing, a good meal, honey. Whether it was or not. And for Adam, that was probably the lousiest meal that his wife ever fixed him. CJ just realized what I said. He should have seen the grin on his face. Debbie's probably rolling with laughter over there. Not sure what Reba's doing, but he had a choice. He could have said, no, thanks, honey. I don't want that. God said don't eat of that fruit. But what did he do? He ate. She set it before him. She handed it to him. He took a bite. He ate. And the eyes of both of them were opened. And they knew they were naked. You see, when they came to recognize good and evil, they came to what is the knowledge of good and evil? What is that called? No. Knowledge of good and evil. Debbie says, Sam, sin is always colorful and painted to draw us in. That's true. Conscience, that's what develops. Yes. Accountability, says O'Shea. No. Yes and no. It's one word and it starts with M. Yes, CJ. He's like, I haven't even posted that. What do you mean? Yes, I can read lips occasionally. Morality. The knowledge of good and evil is morality. O'Shea says my first idea was mortality. Well, they became mortal, that's for sure. They were mortal. So they knew, they found the knowledge of good and evil. They developed morality. They developed conscience. They knew they were naked. You see, without morality, we wouldn't know what nakedness was. A baby has no thought of morality. That is up to his parents to teach morality to the children. Innocence left, Sam says. Yes, innocence left the building. And of course, then we get into the wonderful point of the fig leaves. So they knew their nakedness. And even though they're the only human beings in the world, they recognize that nakedness is wrong. Even though they're man and wife, nakedness is still wrong. Hello, Sean. Genesis chapter 3. Good to have you with us. Santa Debbie says, I've always thought that when we sin, knowing that we are not to, and still do it, our eyes are open to our nakedness, so to speak. Well, there is some of that. Yes, CJ. 225, where it says the man and his wife were naked and were not ashamed, but now they were naked and ashamed. Why? Because they have morality. They have the knowledge of good and evil, because that was what was opened unto them when they disobeyed God. And so they have to remedy their nakedness. Their first inclination in this new knowledge is to remedy their nakedness. And they sewed fig leaves together. Now, fig leaves are interesting because we're not talking about small little, oak leaves or maple leaves. We're talking large leaves. You've seen large leaves like palm leaves and stuff like that. But we're talking about large, solid leaves like as what are fig leaves. And they're sewing these things together. Now, this is amazing. Man and woman in the garden, within days of creation, we're not told how long, they have been equipped for life as gardeners. And here they are sewing fig leaves. Banana leaves are large as well. Debbie says we should be ashamed when we disobey, and that's absolutely true. When we sin, we do, and going back to Debbie's earlier comment, we are spiritually naked, are we not? We are left without any covering.
I think even the New Testament, in talking about the final judgment, uses the language of we'll all be naked before him whom we have to do. So that equates that with nakedness. Do you know the scripture I'm referencing?
There are 40 verses found with the word naked in it. We're going to start. Let's look at that briefly. I don't want to get too drawn away into this topic, but let's look here. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. I'm going to begin right here in verse 1. For we know that if our earthly house, this tent, is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. For in this we groan earnestly, desiring to be clothed with our habitation, which is from heaven, if indeed, having been clothed, we shall not be found naked. For we who are in this tent groan, being burdened, not because we want to be unclothed, but further clothed, that mortality may be swallowed up by life. Now, he who has prepared us for this very thing is God, who also has given us the Spirit as a guarantee. So we are always confident, knowing that while we are at home in the body, we are absent from the Lord. And then, of course, we walk by faith and not by sight. So remember that I want to now go to Galatians, you know where I'm going. For as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. So in other words, Christ is our robes, our clothing. All right. And then Hebrews 4:13. We talk about how verse 4, verse 12, in chapter 4, verse 12, for the word of God is living and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the division of soul and spirit and of joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are naked and open to the eyes of him to whom we must give account. There's no way for us to be able to hide anything from him. We're all stand naked before him.
That was the passage.
In that sense. One final passage, and that's in Revelation. Is it 6? Verse 9? Yes. And here we have, when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed as they were was completed. In other words, God gave them clothing, spiritual clothing. Now, so, there is a sense wherein we sin, we're naked. When we stand before God, everything is naked. There's nothing hidden. And then, of course, there is a sense in which those who have put on Christ, those who are Christ, those who have received salvation and are waiting the final judgment in Christ, they have a white robe of clothing granted by God. Now, CJ asked about an honest question. Was it God allowing them to be immoral before chapter 3? I have a lot of questions about this text. All right, we have, Debbie makes the point that God gives us free will. Sam says no. And they chose the free will to disobey God. God doesn't make us stay faithful. We should desire to stay faithful because he desires us. The question arose over the idea that man was innocent. Is it immoral for a baby to run around naked? Well, let me ask you this. Let me see if I can figure this one out. I got to change versions because the wording I'm thinking of is always There we go. I think it's here. Therefore, just as through one man sin entered the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men because all sinned. For until the law, sin was in the world, but sin is not imputed when there is no law. Nevertheless, death reigned from Adam to Moses, even over those who had not sinned, according to the likeness of the transgression of Adam, who is a type of him who was to come. The point I'm trying to make is that... oh, wait, there it is. There's the word I was looking for. Romans 7. Sin, taking an opportunity by the commandment, produced in me all manner of evil desire. For apart from the law, sin was dead. Outside the law, sin was dead. I was alive once without the law. But when the commandment came, sin revived and I died. Paul says, I was alive outside the law once. But then the law came, the commandment came, and sin revived and I died. There is a point in time where in innocence there is no sin because of innocence. What is the child immoral because he is innocent and has no shame? Has no knowledge of sin? What is it that gives us, or what is it that makes us sinful? Debbie, CJ says no, and then Debbie says a child has no accountability. What is it that makes us sinful? So CJ says giving into wrong desires. It's something even more basic than that, CJ. Wrong book. I mean, right book, wrong passage. Sam says, unless you get instruction, you cannot disobey. That knows instructions. Without instructions, how do you know the line is crooked unless you know what straight line is? Kat says breaking God's law. Sam says disobedience. Let's go over to James. James explains it this way. James chapter 4:17. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does it not, or does not do it, to him it is sin. What was it that happened when they partook of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? Teresa says not obeying the gospel. Debbie says being a Peter, taking our eyes off Jesus. What was the tree that they partook of? Sam says they knew. What was the tree that they partook of? O'Shea says Maureen says that they knew and they did it anyway. O'Shea says they had no knowledge of good and evil, meaning they didn't know what good was, so they didn't know right from wrong, meaning All of the ignorance led them to sinlessness. Just my 2 cents. CJ said sin. Teresa said tree of life. No. Sam says good and evil. No. Debbie says knowledge of good and evil. Reba says the tree of knowledge. That's exactly it. Let's look at that tree. He made every tree to grow that is pleasant to the eye. The tree of life was also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't the tree of good and evil. It was the tree of knowledge. And it's a very important distinction to recognize, because when she ate of that tree, when they both ate of that fruit, what happened? The eyes of both of them were opened. That's later, Debbie. The eyes. It's not that their physical eyes were not already open. But their morality was not open. Their spiritual eyes. You see, they didn't have that knowledge of good and evil. And when they partook of it, the knowledge they gained that knowledge. They suddenly knew that they had done wrong. O'Shea says, and I suppose that could be linked to why the beginning of knowledge is God, just pondering out loud right here. Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7 is what O'Shea is referring to. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Did Adam and Eve have the fear of the Lord? At first, Eve demonstrated it, right? But what? What happened? What changed? The woman was deceived, and being deceived, she fell into transgression. Sam says that meant the tree of knowledge. I guess I should type more fully. Debbie says, I don't think they did at that moment. They took that bite. Aye. Sam says they got talked out of it, beguiled to think different. Deceived is what she was. See, Adam was not deceived. It was Eve that was deceived, not Adam. And in her deception, she transgressed. And in her transgression, she then caused Adam, or led Adam into sinning. Adam had his own sin to take care of. Think back, if you would, CJ. Or your dad told you no. Did you know that something was wrong with doing whatever action you were doing? I would hazard a guess that that thought never entered your mind. And the reason I say that is because most babies, if not all babies, when they're told not to do something, don't have the capability of reasoning it out.
I'm sorry, I missed some of your question. Your mic cut out. Can you ask the question again?
Sure.
Thanks.
I said, think back to the very first time that your mom or dad told you no. Did you know that there was something wrong with whatever it was you were doing? The reason I bring that in is because as a baby, your parents told you no many times. And most of us can't remember the very first time that our parents ever told us no. Me, in fact, I can't remember anything up until the time I was 4 years old. So now let's remember that Adam and Eve, while they were equipped with all the tools necessary, knowledge necessary to tend the garden, they knew that God had said no. Should that have been sufficient? And we're going to close our discussion this morning with this, or this evening with this. Thank you. Adam and Eve were told not to do something by God. That should have been sufficient enough. In fact, Eve references directly the command by God not to do this particular action. But remember that powerful are the words of the deceiver. And he was, as Jesus says later in John, 8? He was a liar and the father of lies from the beginning. And so he deceived. We have her reasoning listed in Genesis chapter 3. It was good for food. It was pleasant to the eyes. And it was going to make her wise like God. Those are three powerful temptations. One might say that fulfills the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. In the most basic sense of the definition. We took a little bit longer this week than I had anticipated over this section. we're going to continue and finish chapter 3 next week. I hope and pray that you have been edified through our study. When we get through to the end of chapter 5, I have a few questions over the whole entire. We'll kind of do a little bit of a review with a few questions thrown in, or primarily just questions before we move on to 6, because that's the next section of the of Genesis that we're going to cover. So we're going to, so we'll do just a little bit of a fun little question and answer type of deal. And so I anticipate the next couple of classes moving pretty quickly. And as I said, I hope you have been edified, and I hope that you will be prepared for reading, because in about 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 7 minutes, we'll be going live on Let's Read the Bible. Let's read the whole Bible, y'all. And I look forward to seeing you then. Have a good day. To study to show your